cage of brocade and lace. The Astrum Terra hung seemingly motionless above the slowly turning world of Sarathar. Beside it, the aggressor, unyielding, a smaller battleship, but only by comparison, cut a far more brutal silhouette. It was a warship built not for ceremony, but for sheer destructive power. Its low profile suited the brutalist doctrine of line-of-battle engagements. Gun decks shielded under thick glacis adamantium, lance turrets retractable beneath rotating armor plates, and its void-hardened hull bristled with casemates like a hedgehog's back. The sun of the local star cast long shadows across its brass and gold upper works. Along its dorsal spine, crenellated turrets broke the silhouette, allowing forward and rear coverage with minimal exposure. 6 torpedo launchers yawed open in its prow like the mouths of siege beasts. Flank-mounted tubes and cavernous macro battery decks ran almost the length of the vessel. Ships like these had not been seen in the Reach for many years. Only the Astrum Deus of Manifold Dawn could challenge such might in direct combat. Together, the Astrum Terra and Aggressor Unyielding were not just symbols of power. They were statements. The former, an avatar of imperial aristocracy, the latter, a weaponized fortress. On the command deck of the Astrum Terra, the High Council of Sarathar stood surrounded by their retinues, adjutants, scribes, painted sycophants, and the usual orbit of parasites that clung to such men. Their faces were painted silver in the local fashion, with lips dyed black, the precise shade denoting station within the Hiveforge hierarchy. Jewels glittered across brocade robes embroidered with constellations and nebulae. Lace veils rolled from their caps, pinned with family sigils and caste marks. Serfs bustled between them with fans, while servo skulls glided overhead bearing data slates and chirruping Binharic dispatches. These skulls, bone-bleached and painted azure, bore golden lace drapery and gemstone optic implants, less tools than pageantry. 7 of the 9 council members were present. One had been removed. His hive, Doomrahal, had entered open conflict with the High Council. His body now hung skeletal from its walls, his finery still barely holding him together. The 9th seat had long stood empty. Hive Mahagiri was gone, reduced to glass and ash. General Trevaux barely concealed his disgust. A career soldier, his bearing remained formal, though his distaste was evident. Councilman Pandya of Pashupura Hive, the nominal spokesman of the council, waved his fan at him in some approximation of cordiality. Trevaux gave a short, empty salute before turning away. Beside him, Admiral Amun Keltrax had not acknowledged the council at all. He stood at the vast absidal viewport, staring toward the emptiness of the system's translation point. His expression was hard, reflective. "When we came to the Reach, I expected mud and techno-barbarians," Keltrax said. "Instead, it's like stepping back onto Terra, but with worse manners." "Sarathar is just one forge," said Trevaux, his voice level. "The Reach holds many: Manifold Dawn, Incaloris, Castel, Nitwortha, Grimness, each with their own eccentricities. All run by fops with cogwheel tattoos under silk," Keltrax spat. "Men who wouldn't know a spanner from a relic. I am a voidsman. I started in the ducts hunting sump rats. These preening creatures disgust me." Trevaux, highborn himself, had walked a different path. He had left his appointed station to enlist in the Astra Militarum without purchasing a commission. A line trooper at first, promoted to sergeant within a year. He had buried his accent, adopted the coarseness of the men around him, earned their respect. 10 years later, he was a captain. Now, a general with 3 laurels, and his father still refused to speak to him, still seeing him as little more than a mud-fighting mercenary in service to the Imperium. A flicker of light pulsed ahead, 2 vessels translating into real space at once. Keltrax zoomed in with his augmetic eye. One was a Sarathar frigate, likely escorting incoming diplomatic envoys. The other, "What in the name of Nova Terra is that?" Trevaux allowed himself a tight smile. "You wanted to meet techno-barbarians. That's from Forge World Nightwortha. Their domain spans most of the Arcana Inclusium, small colonies, mining outposts. The fleet is known as the Navis Astra Wigathine." "That," said the Admiral, narrowing his eyes, "is an Astartes strike cruiser." Trevaux nodded. "Yes, the Void Revenants have their fortress monastery there. They call it Nitward Hal. Odd name. Who leads them? A man named Bjornwolf Elfwine. Legend says his betrothed was turned into a dragon, and that he once slew an orc war boss with a tree." Keltrax said nothing. The approaching cruiser was painted in a blue so dark it nearly vanished against the starfield, its hull adorned with skulls, flanked by wisps of spectral flame etched in etheric paint that flickered in and out of existence. "Prepare to receive honored guests," Keltrax barked to his bridge officers, though his tone lacked any real warmth. Travaux said nothing, but allowed himself a faint smile. He had the sense the Admiral would soon discover that these guests were not like the perfumed council behind them. The hatch at the rear of the bridge was already open. Drapes and potted plants, hastily borrowed from the hydroponics deck, had been brought up and arranged along the spine corridor. Normally a rapid transit route for damage control teams during battle, today it had been transformed into a makeshift ceremonial approach. A length of faded purple carpet, found rolled in a store's locker, had been laid out along the deck. This adornment was the idea of Adjutant Thudrick, who had consulted with the void ship's captain on proper ceremonial procedure. A small, somewhat cloudy fish tank had even been placed at the entrance, donated by a sentimental crewman. Both Adjutant Thudrick and his counterpart, Adjutant Dondeval Shreve, had agreed it was a thoughtful touch, having been told the visitors hailed from a fishbowl world of endless ocean. They hoped it might make them feel more at home. General Travaux' honor guard stood at intervals around the bridge, bayonets fixed, boots polished, armor cleaned as best the Astra Militarum could manage. Sand stains still clung stubbornly to their fatigues and boots, remnants of recent action. One guardsman, lacking proper decorum but high in spirit, had even placed a bleached chicken bone in his hair, a gesture of respect toward their barbarian guests. Lining the spine corridor stood the Void Guard, elite assault troops of the Astrum Terra, the Admiral's personal strike force. They wore deep void black armor, their visors blank, combat swords sheathed at their backs, and heavy void shields resting beside their greaves, one gauntleted hand on the grip. To the Admiral's right stood his senior deck officers, department heads from both the Astrum Terra and the Aggressor Unyielding, alongside his personal command staff. They wore full-dress uniforms adorned with campaign ribbons, honor badges, and fresh purity seals, their wax so recent it still exuded the scent of sanctified incense. Between the General's officers and the Admiral's delegation stood representatives of the expedition's ecclesiarchy. Deacon Holkar, clad in plain sand-stained robes, bore a power mace at his side, dented from battlefield use. Around him stood shipboard confessors and regimental preachers. Unlike the polished imperial ministorum, these were field priests, scarred, grim-faced, their chain blades and last pistols visibly worn. They stood silent and watchful, shaped by flame and faith alike. Arrayed behind General Travaux were his 7 colonels, save for the 16th Regiment, whose lieutenant colonel stood in place of its slain commander, lost during the recent assault on Hive Doomrahal and not yet formally promoted. Beside them stood the brigade commanders of independent units, a colorful array, from the bright blue frock coat of the Rough Rider Cavalry Major to the soot-stained coveralls of the 9th Independent Baneblade Brigade, currently on loan from the 32nd Army Group, still fighting in the West against rogue separatist republics. To one side stood the Lex Marshal, flanked by a file of Adeptus Arbites Lexmex. Their uniforms had been hastily rubbed down to remove grime and made to stand more or less straight in a jagged sort of line. Warrant Officer Dornstall stood at their left flank with 4 other warrant officers, arms folded behind their backs. He noted Lexmec Ranjan trying to hide at the rear. He suppressed a smile. Next to them stood the white-clad Sisters Hospitaller, who had arrived the previous day. Among them was Katerina Malinovska, still wearing Arbit's pattern armor. Clearly she had not had time to change. The sisters stood in pristine battle plate, their visors retracted, expressions solemn. Behind them loomed the Fraters Militia Hospitaller, clad in gilded flak plate and reinforced carapace, bolters in hand. Their armor was etched in gold leaf and silver trim, though all present knew such ornamentation belied their lethality. They had recently recovered the body of the 16th Regiment's commander from the East Bastion, yet had still taken time to clean and polish for the gathering. At the far side of the bridge, deliberately distant from General Travaux, stood the councilmen of Forge World Sarathar and their retinue of servo-skull aides, fan-bearers, and scribes. Councilman Pandya stood at the fore, fanning himself despite the bridge's temperature being maintained at a steady 18 degrees. His robes were voluminous, his face split by a fixed smile that did not reach the eyes. There was a clang and thud from the end of the spine corridor. The shuttle from the Tenebris Lex, carrying the dignitaries of Nitwirtha, had arrived. The Astartes, it was said, would arrive separately. General Trevaux glanced to Admiral Amun Keltrax. The admiral gave a small nod. Whatever they were about to meet, they would be ready. From down the spine corridor, a figure appeared. She was hunched forward, robed in Mechanicus crimson, a shade slightly lighter than the traditional rust red of Mars. As she advanced along the long walkway, the two commanders, General Trevaux and Admiral Amun Keltrax, glanced at one another in quiet concern. The figure's face was a golden mask, sculpted in the form of a serene woman with a long seam running down the nose ridge. Her back was bowed beneath bundles of spines, hydraulic tubing, and twitching mechadendrites. Her legs were hidden beneath long flowing robes. At her flanks marched blank-faced servitors and a detachment of rust-cloaked Skitari, followed by a squad of white-armored warriors in archaic cataphracti plate, their armor worn but immaculate, their presence deeply unsettling. As the assembly entered the bridge, there was a collective intake of breath. The delegation from Sarathar's High Council stiffened, trying not to betray offense, while the ship's officers remained tense, standing with the rigid discipline only years of service could forge. One of the Wigathane guards, bearded and casual despite the pomp, noticed an Astra Militarum trooper with a chicken bone woven into his hair. The barbarian warrior laughed loudly and waved at him, a rare break in the formal silence. That silence was so complete now that the soft hiss of the bridge's oxygen scrubbers could be heard overhead. General Trevaux caught a low whisper from Admiral Keltrax beside him. "Is that a Void Revenant?" He said nothing. The woman with the golden face turned, her gaze sweeping the bridge. It fell for a moment upon the fishbowl near the side of the entryway. A diplomatic blunder, she was sure, and her head tilted ever so slightly. Then she looked directly at the general. She stepped forward, and as she moved, her robes parted to reveal long legs encased in high-heeled mechanized boots. She rose to her full height, the mechadendrites behind her unfurling into 8 arachnid-like talons, splaying wide like a heraldic crest. Then, with a faint hiss, the golden mask split down its center, the seams parting. Beneath it was the flawless synth-flesh face of Archmagos Damiavoratrix, pale and elegant. Her ruby-red lips curled into a smile almost human, and there was an audible gasp across the bridge. "Greetings, General Admiral," she said with regal ease, inclining her head slightly to both men. Then her gaze turned toward the Sarathar delegation. "Ah, Councilman Pandya, you're looking," she paused, "well kept." She turned to the rest of the assembled audience and radiated confidence. Inside, however, she still seethed at the fishbowl's presence. Who thought that was amusing? But she refused to let it show. 50 years ago, she'd been cast out to the Maelstrom Reach by the Mechanicus Lords of Mars, exiled with a broken ship and a dull-witted adjutant. Now she stood before the nobility of Sarathar and the command echelon of the Nova Terran army and fleet. They stood in awe of her power. Well, she thought, the Nova Terran forces were as good as the High Lord's Imperium, at least in her mind. From behind her, a smaller figure in deep red and violet stepped forward, giving a respectful nod. "I am Deacon Absalon of the Ecclesiarchy of the Emperor's Realm of Nitwirtha, rulers of the Arcana Inclusium, and protectors of the Reach." He dropped to one knee in a sweeping bow. The gathered dignitaries regarded him curiously. Deacon Holkar and the assembled battlefield priests exchanged glances, intrigued. One of the Sarathar councilwomen snorted. "Protectors of the Reach? Little upstarts," she muttered with a disdainful laugh. Far down the corridor, there was a second clang and thud, another shuttle docking. Still kneeling, Deacon Absalon turned his bowed head slightly toward the councilwoman and smiled. "Our lords will be here shortly." The woman looked offended and flapped her fan furiously in front of her face. General Trevaux tightened his grip on his sword hilt. He and the admiral exchanged another glance. Then from the rear of the spine corridor came a deep, rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. The unmistakable approach of power-armored boots, marching in perfect synchronicity like pistons in the heart of a forge world. Univoratrix, still smiling, turned gracefully to one side of the doors and dropped to one knee in a gesture of elaborate reverence. Her hidden limbs flexed beneath her robes as she sank low to the deck. Deacon Absalon remained knelt, head bowed. The Skitari stepped aside. The Wigathine, more relaxed than most, looked down the corridor, and with a casual salute, moved clear of the path. General Trevor's hand clenched tighter on the hilt of his weapon. The Void Revenants were arriving. Atrocity Rate Plaster? Bjornwolf Elfwine marched into the bridge, his armor the stormy blue of the Void Revenants. There were no golden embellishments, only a broad aquila across his breastplate, upon which were strapped two enormous tusks, bound by sinew cord. His left pauldron bore a painted seascape, an ocean crested by a lone ship, while the right displayed a skull wreathed in ethereal ghost flame. His helm was shaped like a boar's head, its jutting tusks stylized in tribute to his world's ancient totems. In one gauntleted hand he carried a standard pattern power sword, undecorated, freshly drawn from the chapter armory. In the other, he held a Serpenta-patterned plasma pistol, baroque and masterfully wrought, a gift from his uncle, Magos Ductora Cogitatus Tiberius. He halted mid-bridge, taking in the full array of officers, politicians, and clergy. His helm gave away no expression, but inside he sneered. Over the unit Vox, Osric's voice crackled. I reckon we could take them, might save time later, could even earn a medal. Behind Bjornwolf entered Osric, clad in crimson tech-marine plate, flanked by Skop Wolfgar, his skull-faced helm marking him a chaplain. At the sight of him, several members of the ecclesiarchy visibly stiffened. Silence, brother Osric, Wolfgar warned, his voice cold over the Vox. We are here to speak, not to fight. Well said, came Edric's voice, as he stepped in beside Wolfgar. Unlike Bjornwolf, the Flotwaird's armor bore fine engravings of the Geofon, the sea god of ancient worth and myth. His back carried folded mace dendrites reminiscent of Mechanicus augmentation. Upon his pauldron was a stylized skull with a bolt hole through the brow, a Wigathan tradition representing the memory of his predecessor. They were followed by the senior captains, Phaond, Beortham, Sinwolf, Hathrid, Heorewolf, and Hafoxstan, the Void Revenants command cadre present in full force. Behind them came Elfric and his apprentice Cuthhelm, the two Gastweird librarians, clad in pale blue, their power staves inert, but held at the ready. Silence blanketed the bridge. General Trevaux exchanged a glance with Admiral Amun Keltrax, then took a measured step forward. Slowly, he dropped to one knee. Your presence is deeply honored, my lord. There was a sigh over the internal Vox. If this is my first duty as chapter master, said Bjornwolf, then let it be a memorable one. He closed the Vox channel and reached up, releasing his helm with a hiss of pressure. His face was lined but strong, pale as bone, marked by the trials of war. He stepped forward and extended a hand toward the kneeling general. Around the bridge, Astra Militarum troopers shifted nervously, hands drifting toward holsters. A glance from Edric stilled them. He smiled and nodded politely. Bjornwolf helped General Trevaux to his feet. We are the Adeptus Astartes, he began, angels of the Emperor, sworn to die in the defense of mankind, from heretics, xenos, and the warp-spawned monsters that crawl in the dark. He paced, voice cold and even. But never forget, we are post-human. We died for humanity the moment we were remade in gene forges. All we have left is battle and death. We are not gods. We are not to be worshipped. We are your servants. He turned, addressing the entire bridge, counselors, admirals, priests, generals. You are Imperials. Whether you swear to the High Lords of Terra or to the Council of Nova Terra, you are mankind. And we, the Emperor's angels, stand neutral in your wars of pride. But know this. His gaze snapped to the silver-painted counselor who had insulted Deacon Absalon, the incident caught by Edric's hacking of the bridge Vox channel. We are the Void Revenants. We are the defenders of the Reach. The councilwoman paled beneath her silver makeup. Her fan dropped from her hand. Wolfgar looked to the chapter master with his green eye lenses. He was impressed, but held his silence. He had half feared the man would stomp forward and drive his power sword into the deck in the Wigathan manner of announcing parley. And truth be told, Bjornwolf had simply taken a standard blade from the ship's armory, hardly the kind of ceremonial relic one expected from a chapter master. It was plain, unadorned. That in itself said much. General Treveau gave a slow nod, his eyes shifting to Deacon Absalon, then to the Archmagos. As I understand it, Nitwertha remains loyal to Terra, he said, not as an accusation, but a measured statement. A murmur passed through the council delegation. One of them whispered, "Shame," while fluttering her fan to veil her amusement. Deacon Absalon stepped forward, voice clear. The people of Nitwertha follow the teachings of the Adeptus Ministorum on Terra, not the dangerously misguided supporters of the Council. Deacon Holkar slammed his staff against the deck. The Church stands firm in the truth. The ecclesiarchy of Terra has grown corrupt, bloated with contradictions and political games. The flock of Terra has lost its way. We look to the future, not the past. Absalon turned, voice firm. Heretics turn their backs on the Emperor's Holy Spirit. Holkar snorted. It's difficult to deny the Emperor's spirit when it guides our vessels through the immaterium. The Astronomicon is visible to all. It does not demand blind belief, and no man should be made to grovel before it in adoration. Heretic, Absalon snapped. You deny what you see with your own eyes. Holkar struck the deck again. Faith must be a fire lit in the soul of every man, not a chain hung round his neck by those who claim divine authority through inherited robes and stagnant ritual. He turned now to address both the High Council and the Wigathan delegation. We of the Church do not deny the Emperor. We venerate him, not as a distant god idol, but as the guiding light of humanity's potential, the unifier, the sacrifice, the symbol of what we might one day become. Our devotion is not in whispered canticles before opulent altars, but in the toil of our hands, in the defense of the weak, and in the unity of all human worlds against the true enemies, the alien, the traitor, and the warp-born. Absalon raised his staff in return. Only the Ministorum on Terra has the understanding and authority to interpret the Emperor's will. Holkar stepped forward. The ecclesiarchy of Terra has become a relic of power games and fear. It demands obedience, not understanding. It fears progress. It mistrusts thought. It hoards truth and calls it sanctity. But faith without truth is shadow play. If the Emperor wished to speak to us, he would do so. Until then, we must walk by light, not leash. He now addressed the crew of the Astrum Terra and the assembled Astra Militarum officers. We do not bow to priests who speak in riddles and threats. We kneel only in memory of the Emperor's sacrifice and rise in his name to build a future where mankind stands united with one purpose, survival and the forging of a new golden age. The Sisters Hospitaller stood with imperious expressions, their eyes on Chapter Master Bornwolf, clearly appraising his reaction to the theological volley. Holkar turned to them, concluding, "Let Terra keep its golden cathedrals. We build sanctuaries in the trenches, shrines on the decks of dying void ships, faith in the hearts of soldiers and settlers. Ours is a church of purpose, not pageantry." The Church delegation stepped back, their confessors silent but defiant. Bjornwolf remained still, silent through it all. He looked to Absalon, who met his gaze, steadied himself, and stepped back to the ranks of the Nitwertha delegation. Bjornwolf finally spoke. "We are not here to argue doctrine or faith. We are here to discuss the stability of the Reach." He turned, giving a slight nod to Una. Archmagos Demia Voratrix stepped forward. A smile ghosted across her pale face as she swept back her blood-red hair. She moved to Bornwolf's side, placing one elegant cybernetic hand gently on his pauldron. "General, I am Archmagos of the Great Forge of Nitwertha. Though I am aligned with the Red Planet, I swore fealty to the High Lords of Terra. We are an Imperium-sponsored colony." Admiral Amun Keltrax bristled. "We are the Imperium, and we do not sponsor you." Voratrix raised a brow, cool and amused. "You are a faction, Admiral, one with delusions of grandeur." Keltrax stepped forward, fury brimming, but General Travo raised a restraining hand. Wolfgar moved beside Bjornwolf. "What the Lady Voratrix says is true." A councilwoman sneered. "She is not a lady." Bjornwolf turned his helm slightly. The woman recoiled as if struck, her fan slipping from her fingers. Wolfgar ignored the interruption. Nitwertha was established with full Imperium sanction. The Iron Hands were tasked with defending the Reach and establishing a bastion of strength. That sponsorship and allegiance stands, Void Revenants or not. This makes us Astarted's territory by imperial right, and no matter who claims to rule the stars, that has not changed. Travo looked to Voratrix, not the warriors. So what you're saying is, Nitwortha is neutral in this conflict? She gave a radiant smile. Stripped of emotion, yes, our loyalty remains with the High Lords while they rule. If the Imperium changes hands, our policies will not. The survival of humanity remains our only constant. Trevaux gave a wry nod. An interesting concept. I wonder how long you can keep it up. Una offered a dry reply. It's worked so far. The Admiral gave a short laugh. It broke the tension like a knife through wax. Then he straightened, stepping into the light. We of Nova Terra look forward, not back. While the servants of Terra kneel before rusted relics and call progress heresy, we call it what it is, archaeotech reclamation. What the Mechanicus forbids, we restore. What the High Lords fear, we wield. Our foundries are not shrines, our scholars not cultists, we build for tomorrow. As for the faith of the Imperium, an ossified corpse of dogma ruled by robed carrion birds on their gilded thrones, it is useful, yes, as a symbol, but it is a leash, and leashes are for warhounds. Nova Terra does not worship decay, we command the future. Edric folded his arms. Nice sentiment, seen similar ones carved on more than a few epitaphs. General Trevaux gave a curt nod. That will be seen. Councilman Pandya broke the quiet with an obnoxious clap, his gloved hands slapping together in fast, irritating rhythm. His silver-painted face split into a too-wide grin. Your sage words, General, are better than any the Council of Sarathar could have conjured, and we are known for our poetry. Trevaux attempted a tight-lipped smile. Voratrix regarded the man as if he'd slithered out of a sump drain. Pandya stepped forward. This pact benefits us both. Mutual protection, shared progress. He glanced at Bornwolf. And if the techno-barbarians are too foolish to see the true way of the future, more fool they who follow the Archmagos. He moved dangerously close to Voratrix. Tell me, what brings you here if not to kneel before the might of the Council's fleet? Admiral Keltrax stepped in sharply, raising a hand. My apologies, lady. The councilman does not speak for my fleet, nor for the general. We are not seeking conflict. Wolfgar nodded once. Nor are we, Admiral, which brings us finally to the reason for our visit. Wolfgar's vox-filtered voice cut through the chamber. What is the Council's stance on dealings with Xenos? General Trevaux straightened his back, folding his hands behind him. His voice, firm and cold, carried the weight of command. We are not idealists, nor are we fools, he said. The alien is a threat. On that, there can be no doubt. Not because some ancient scripture tells me so, or because a priest croaks it from a pulpit chiseled in gold, but because I have seen the aftermath of their wars. I have walked the ruins, counted the bones, and seen what they do when left unchecked. We do not make peace with Xenos. We do not seek to understand them. But we also do not waste men, ships, or resources chasing phantoms when we are already fractured over orthodoxy. We face enough division. There is no sense in splitting our strength further unless the threat demands it. Wolfgar's skull-faced helm inclined slightly. Then explain to me, he said, why it has come to our attention that Forge World Sarathar has entered into dealings with the Drukhari of Elfscathia. A sharp intake of breath swept the room. One of the Sarathar councilwomen burst forward in fury. Utter slander. You come here and accuse us of consorting with monsters, while you grovel with barbarians who can't even spell the word Imperium. Wolfgar did not turn to face her. Instead, he extended his gauntlet. From his hand, a scatter of glimmering trinkets clattered to the deck, alien in shape and unmistakable in origin, glittering with Drukhari sigils and poison-shaded jewels. Adjutant Thudrik stepped forward and knelt, examining a few of the ornaments. He looked up to the general and gave a short nod. Trevaux narrowed his eyes. How did you come by these? Wolfgar said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. One of the other counselors snarled. No doubt brought from your own collection to fabricate evidence. This is a provocation, not proof. General Trevaux gave him a single cold glance, then turned his gaze back to Wolfgar. Wolfgar raised his Crozius, the head of the sacred weapon casting a low light, and aimed it, not at the council, but at the Arbites delegation, silent until now. Councilman Pandya, his silver-painted face tense, scowled at the Lex Marshal and made a nervous step backward. He raised his fan and clicked it shut with a single sharp snap. Behind him, his adjutant, Dandeval Shreve, whispered into a small communications node shaped like an ornamented pendant hanging from his backplate. Bjornwolf noted the movement, his eyes narrowing slightly behind his boar-faced helm. His gauntleted hand twitched at his side, forming subtle battle signs to Edric. Edric made no visible movement, but within his helmet, his interface linked into the ship's systems. A localized Vox ping triangulated on the bridge receivers. It took only seconds to isolate the private channel. The encryption was crude. Edric smiled grimly. His gauntlet moved, returning a brief sign, confirmed. None noticed the exchange. The Lex Marshal stepped forward and raised one gloved hand in salute. "These trinkets," he declared in a voice like steel, "were used as payment for an assassination attempt on Lady Katerina Malinovska." Gasps rippled through the chamber. General Travaux turned slowly toward Katerina. She stood unmoved, her eyes sharp and cold. Warrant Officer Dornstall stepped forward from the shadows behind her. He carried a sealed dossier. With a disciplined motion, he handed it to the general. Travaux took it, flipped open the binding with a single hand, and skimmed the parchment inside. His expression remained unreadable as he passed the file to Adjutant Thudric. The room fell into silence again, tense, brittle, and expectant. General Travaux' expression turned to stone. He had read the final entry in the report Dornstall had handed him, and the words seared into his thoughts like a brand. "Prisoners, Imperial citizens, turned over to Drukhari handlers," he said coldly. "These were warriors of the Imperium, regardless of which banner they served beneath." He turned his gaze on Councilman Pandya, and his voice dropped to a growl. "This is treason," Pandya scoffed, voice dripping with mocking civility. "Lies, political fabrications. You see what you want to see, General. You've been misled. You traded living humans for void ore," Travaux snapped, stepping forward. "I outrank you, General," Pandya said, snapping his fan shut with a sharp click. "You command the fleet, I command the planet. The military answers to me, and if you will not respect my authority, then you will be removed." Before the general could respond, a soft chime echoed from the ceiling Vox relays, clear, calm, and damning. "Command key intercepted. Surface defense batteries, target the Lexmech frigate and the Void Revenant strike cruiser. Orders to open fire the moment the delegation departs orbit. Personal authority, Pandya." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the chamber. Travaux' jaw clenched. The room turned colder. Pandya raised his hands in disingenuous calm. "It was for the good of the Council," he said. "Voratrix refused to renounce Terra. That made her and her Forge World liabilities. I was acting," his voice twisted with pride, "as a loyal governor of Nova Terra." That was enough. Admiral Keltrax drew his power saber in a single motion, blade humming. "Guards, arrest this traitor!" But before the order could be obeyed, Adjutant Dondeval Shreve drew a compact sidearm from beneath his ceremonial robe and fired. The bolt round streaked toward the admiral's chest, only to impact harmlessly against storm blue ceramite. Bjornwolf had moved, stepping into the shot. His tusked helm turned toward the attacker as if daring him to try again. Without hesitation, Edric drew his plasma pistol and fired. Shreve screamed as his chest ignited, collapsing in a heap of smoking flesh. "Protect the Admiral," Edric growled. The room erupted. Two Sarythar guardsmen raised rifles at General Travaux, who activated his refractor field in time to deflect the initial shots. Voratrix stepped forward, her own plasma pistol barking twice. Both guards crumpled. A third rushed her. A fourth was locked in a desperate struggle with another man in the same uniform, fighting over a pistol. That argument was resolved when a voidsman stepped in and stunned the attacker with a baton. The two backed away from each other, breathing hard. Osric caught a thrown grenade with a mechadendrite, slapped it to the deck, and sprayed sealant foam over it. It detonated with a quiet whumph beneath the containment paste. 3 of the counselor's attendants dropped their fans and charged. Auto pistols and ritual blades flashed in the hollow light. Bjorthelm met one mid-charge, smashing him aside for Sinwolf to dispatch with a precise thrust of his Seeks. Another council aide fell to Bjorthelm's bolt pistol. The third was caught mid-leap by Hithred, who simply lifted him bodily and hurled him into the wall, leaving a smear of red against the ceramite. Hiorawulf and Hafoxton moved to shield the assembled priests, weapons raised. Gastward Elfric stepped forward, projecting a transparent force field between the council party and the rest of the chamber. Cuthhelm gestured toward the great doors. The hatch slammed shut with a metallic clang. Dozens of weapons hissed from holsters and mag clasps, laslocks, bolt pistols, plasma sidearms, chain blades. Soldiers of the Astrum Terra's fleet, the Novaterra Navy, Scutari of Voratrix's retinue, Hospitaller wardens, Void Revenants, all stared one another down, uncertain who stood on whose side. In the center, both Deacon Absalon and Deacon Holkar moved as one. Whatever ideological rift had divided them was forgotten. They raised their staves in perfect unison, Absalon's bearing the double-barred Aquila, Holkar's crowned with the flame-ringed star of the Church. Both aimed their weapons squarely at the Sarathar delegation. Voratrix stepped behind them, flickering lines of a refractor field coalescing around all three. Pandya remained unshaken. From beneath his robe, he pulled a small spherical device, blinking with red lights. "Stop," he said coldly. "My agents have seeded charges throughout this vessel. One gesture," he raised the detonator, "and this ship, and every soul on it, will vanish into the void." The chamber froze. Even the Scutari halted. Then, in a blur of green, black, and crimson, Katerina Malinovska moved. From opposite directions, Dornstall and Adjutant Thudrik closed in. Pandya turned, the detonator trembling in his grip, but Katerina struck from behind, screaming. She slammed his wrist, sending the device skittering across the deck to land at General Trevaux's feet. She shoved Pandya forward, tearing away his robe, and revealed what lay beneath. A third arm, unnatural and glistening, unfurled from beneath his ribcage. The fingers were long, clawed, and tinged with violet-blue chitin. Not human. All across the bridge, weapons rose and locked. The chamber thundered with the sound of charging coils and clicking safeties. Even Pandya's own guards hesitated, staring at him in horror. "Xenos!" Wolfgar roared, his Crozius beginning to hum with deadly resonance. Pandya hissed, his pupils narrowing to alien slits. "It is merely an affliction, a gift from the Emperor, in his infinite wisdom," he stammered. "I meant no harm. It was for Sarathar, for Novaterra, for—" General Trevaux stepped forward, raising his pistol. Pandya, held firmly between Katerina, Dornstall, and Thudrik, didn't resist. "You threatened my men," Trevaux said flatly, and fired. The shot cracked like thunder. Pandya's skull burst open, his body slumping lifeless to the deck, all three arms twitching spasmodically. The remaining council delegation cowered in a recess of the bridge, surrounded by soldiers and armsmen from no fewer than 5 factions. Admiral Keltrax turned to Bjornwolf, whose pauldron smoked gently. The tusked skull helm bore a hole through the forehead, but the ceramite held. He nodded in quiet thanks. Bjornwolf returned the nod, then glanced at the corpse. As the Scop said, dealing with Xenos, all eyes turned toward the High Council members still cowering behind Elfric's psychic shield. Bjornwolf gave a slight wave, and Elfric let the barrier drop. Voidsmen and Astra Militarum troopers surged forward, disarming the councilors and their staff. 3 council members were dragged forward. 9 of their attendants followed, all forced to kneel. Each bore unmistakable signs of mutation: vestigial limbs, taloned fingers, warped musculature. "Cultists," Katerina said coldly, as Sisters Hospitaller moved in to examine the afflicted. "Just gifts," muttered one councilman, his head bowed. "Mutation isn't illegal," said a silver-faced woman, her gill-like growths twitching on her neck. "My mother was worse," added a third, raising both a clawed appendage and a malformed third hand. One of the remaining council members, hands raised and silver face paint streaking with sweat, stammered, "We didn't know. We were no part of this." The others with him nodded quickly, one attempting to disappear behind a delicate fan. General Trevaux's gaze swept across them, cold and unreadable. With a sharp gesture, the prisoners were seized by Astrum Militarum troopers and dragged away. "You are all under arrest," he said, voice like iron. "Pending investigation, you will be returned to the surface and confined under armed guard to your official residences." A councilwoman protested. "We have hives to govern." "Sarathar is under martial law," the general replied. Then he turned to the Lex Marshal. "Would you accept emergency powers?" Adjutant Thudrik stepped forward, grim-faced. "This is precisely what we hope to avoid." Deacon Absalon stepped forth, robes stirring in the void recycled air. "Would it not be wiser," he said gently, "for the emergency governance to fall to a neutral party, one acceptable to the forge worlds of the Reach?" Trevaux arched a brow. I suppose you mean Knitworth ecclesiarchy? He asked dryly. Absalom gave a humble smile. Too kind. But as our world is aligned to the Imperium, it might be seen as partial. However, he lifted his staff and pointed it toward Deacon Holkar. The good deacon here is unaffiliated with any planetary denomination, assigned instead to aid the faith of your fleet. In his worthy hands, Sarathar might be better served and better accepted by the Reaches Mechanicum. Holkar gave a look of caution, then turned and bowed slightly. But it may still seem to some that the Council merely reshuffles itself. Archmagos Damia Voratrix stepped forward, her eyes bright with measured calculation. Then allow the Mechanicum of the Arcana Inclusium to pledge its support to such a transition. I can speak to each of the Archmagi across the region if required. Bjornwolf almost laughed aloud. The thought of Yuna negotiating calmly with any of the Archmagi was deliciously absurd. Still, he stepped forward and spoke with quiet authority. The Void Revenants shall remain neutral, but let it be made clear, should any force strike unprovoked against Sarathar, we will act in its defense. Wolfgar looked toward him, voice echoing through their private vox. You're taking a factional side? No, Bornwolf replied, but I'm giving them a reason to hesitate. He cut the vox with finality. General Travaux looked between them all, then gave a nod. Deacon Holkar, you have provisional governorship of Sarathar until the investigation is complete. The deacon bowed low. Across from him, Absalom gave a look of quiet satisfaction. The two men, once rivals in doctrine, had found a rare moment of unspoken accord. The Lex Marshal raised his voice. My men will continue their investigations into the cults. No delay, no quarter. The factions began to disperse. Dornstall moved to Katarina's side. Will you be staying? He asked. There's always a posting open for a good Arbeats in the Lexmech. She offered a tired smile, glancing toward the sisters Hospitaller. I don't know what I'm doing next. As she turned, a priest stepped quietly beside her. Congratulations, Sister Katarina Malinovska, he said in a low voice. We've kept an eye on the Reach since the loss of your father. You appear to have a similar calling. She looked sharply at him. His robe shifted slightly, just enough for her to catch the unmistakable gleam of the Ordo Xenos rosette, hidden beneath the folds. Would you like to talk about it further? He asked, gesturing toward a quiet corridor. Together, they walked away into the shadows beyond the bridge's lumen strips. Dornstall, watching her go, offered his flask to Ranjan. Looks like we're officially investigating cults now. Fancy a trip to the ruins of Hive Mahagiri? There's someone you might want to meet. In the center of the bridge, General Travaux stood beside Beornwolf, eyes scanning the war-scarred Astartes in storm blue plate. His gaze shifted to the warriors of the Gasthelm, where one tech marine chatted casually with an officer. Both wore necklaces of bleached chicken bones. You're not what I expected, Travaux said. Bornwolf grinned behind his skull-faced helm. Neither are you. We were expecting mad heretics frothing at the mouth. Travaux chuckled. Oh, we have those. I just didn't invite them to the meeting. They both laughed. Then the general gave him a sidelong glance. My admiral tells me you once fought an orc war boss, using a tree. Bjornwolf chuckled. I did, though I wasn't a post-human at the time. Travaux nodded toward Admiral Keltrax, who was deep in discussion with Edric. The two exchanged a meaningful glance across the bridge. I was also told, the general said, lowering his voice, that your betrothed turned into a dragon. Bjornwolf looked out toward the stars, toward the Arcana Inclusium, where one white point marked his home. No, he said softly, she was a wyvern. He paused, then added, my son was the dragon.